How's it going, guys? Thanks for tuning in to the Super Bowl preview edition of the Phil Talk Sports Podcast. I got the band back together. Hank and Nick are both here with me. Me and Hank are going off of 2 weeks of anxiety waiting for this damn game, and I think Nick's here for moral support. So, guys, thanks for being here, and we got a game here in about 48 hours.
Yeah, we really do, man. And I got to tell you, it always feels like a little too long. Like, of all the games that you hope is not 2 weeks of length, it is this. So I understand your guys' pain.
I mean, it's one of those things where it's like a double-edged sword because you have to wait so long. But then if you had guys injured during like the conference championship game, they get meaningful time to get better. And there were players on the Eagles who, one had a concussion and someone has a broken back and someone has I don't even know what's wrong with the dude's leg, but they're all supposed to play.
I heard Carter is sick. It's like, oh, great.
Yeah, I mean,
I think he's getting better. To quote Monty Python, I got better.
So this is the fourth Super Bowl of my lifetime that the Eagles were in, and I just don't remember this 2 weeks feeling this long. Not in 22, not in 7, not in 18, and definitely not in 04. Because I mean, when you're younger, you got more. I
don't think they had 2 weeks in 04.
Maybe that's why. But even the past two of modern time just didn't feel this much of a weight.
I don't know. I could feel differently from how Phil feels, but I feel like it's one of those things where I was super confident in 22. I was also very super confident in 17, and I think I was too young to even know. I was 15. I think I was too young to know how confident or not confident I was. It was just we're in the Super Bowl and we're happy to be here. Yeah. I feel like this time around it's more like overthinking things that could go wrong. We've already played this team. We kind of know what to expect. But at the same time, they're also trying to three-peat, and the Eagles are trying to obviously stop them from doing that. So it's a lot.
04, definitely just happy to be there. Probably didn't even realize how big of I think for me it was just getting over the hump of the NFC title game loss. It was more that than anything. 17 was how the hell are we here with everything that happened? And then 22, yeah, I'll admit now, I mean, you can go back and watch the episodes. I was overly confident then. And this year, I'm just numb to it because I've purposely not watched any preview stuff because, any one opinion's going to sway me right now. I've watched maybe there's one particular Eagles podcast that I really like that I try to listen to it, but it just gives me anxiety right now, so I just haven't. Yeah, and I will say this, and Nick, you can tell me if you think I'm crazy. I think this is a better team than in 22 for the Eagles. The Chiefs' defense probably better than 22. The offense way worse than 22. And the field won't be an ice rink. So that is why I am at least comfortably content that, I don't know. Obviously, you can see the Chiefs winning because you had to sit through it 2 years ago. And then people are floating out the Seahawks-Denver type Super Bowl thing that could happen. So, and I think it could be anything in between. So it would be silly of me to just say, oh, yeah, we got this. We've already played them once. We know what to correct. Sirianni has said, I have notes from 2 years ago that if we ever saw them again, what I would do differently. So I'm more reasonably confident because I was irrationally confident the first time. But would you agree that the Eagles are overall better than 22 and the Chiefs are overall worse because the offense is worse?
I feel like there are some places where the Eagles are better and there are some places where the Eagles are worse. I don't think that Jalen Hurts is as good this year as he was in 2022. Obviously, the stats back that up. He had way more passing yards and missed the same amount of games. He just felt like he was a more prolific passer, but of course, we didn't have Saquon Barkley back then, and he adds so much. I'm going to disagree with you and say that I think that the Chiefs not necessarily have the better offense, but I think that they have more talent on their offense. Last time they had I probably couldn't even tell you what receiver they had. They had like Sky Moore. He was like their number one receiver, and Juju Smith-Schuster, and Mahomes was hobbled. I mean, hobbled. And basically, anytime Patrick Mahomes gets injured, I'm just going to believe that it's more fake than real. But this time they have DeAndre Hopkins, who he's getting older. They have Hollywood Brown, who is probably better than Juju Smith-Schuster, and they have Xavier Worthy, who is probably better than any receiver that they had. So I think that they are better on offense, and I think that their defense is a little bit more deadly than it used to be. Like if you're gonna peg this as a Super Bowl that's gonna be somewhere in the both teams are gonna score somewhere in the 30s, I think that would be like an incorrect assessment. I think that this will probably, if it's a blowout, sure, one team might score in the 30s, but I don't think both teams are gonna score in the 30s. I think it's gonna be somewhere in the 20s.
Nick,
Yeah, I can second that. First, I just want to let the audience know before we get too far into this. I'm sure you two, there is too much pregame analysis. There comes a point when we're all running in circles. I think there's an advantage here, an advantage there, and here and there. It's like they're both really good teams. I mean, there's only so much to break down.
Right.
But with that said, to second on what you guys are going on, I think the Eagles statistically are a better defense. And I think Shades, I know, both teams are really good. I could see it going either way. But shades of the first Mahomes Super Bowl against Tampa, when the Chiefs' O-line was completely outmatched. I don't think it's quite that severe this go around, but Philly's defensive front, if Carter is able to play, is a legitimate D-line. And they are not only really good, but very deep. So I think that'll cause problems. And while the Chiefs' O-line is very good, especially in the middle with Creed Humphrey, the outside tackles have been a problem all year, and I think they could take advantage of it on Sunday.
So I think the reason I was overly confident the first time was exactly what you just said. The blueprint on how to beat Kansas City in the big game was forged by Tampa, and not knowing what the field was going to feel like, on that day, I saw no reason we couldn't duplicate that game plan. Obviously, that's going to be easier to do this time around than then, because it's turf, so you can't really have any surprises with turf. So that blueprint, I agree. I think it's not outdated yet. I think you can still pull a lot of stuff from what Tampa did back then. And maybe I should be more confident now than I was then. But after seeing you played 90% of the game perfect, I mean, I remember saying back then, Jalen Hurts played a near perfect game, fumbled for no reason, and then resumed playing a near perfect game. Assuming that fumble doesn't happen again or anything of the sort, you pair that with the upgrade that Miles Sanders, who fumbled on his first touch of the Super Bowl, only touched the ball like 7 more times after that. You replace that running performance with Saquon Barkley on any level, because obviously if you are the Chiefs, I could see people being like, all right, we have to bottle up Barkley and make Hurts beat us. Most people are going to think that. If you are going to bottle up Barkley to that degree, that means you're one-on-one on just about everybody else, and that's hell. That's 4 hours of hell for those DBs out there, for the receivers that we have. So I don't know that you can be that black and white about it, where like all you do is bottle up Barkley. Because even if you try, I mean, most of his long touchdowns this year are against loaded boxes. So it's not like there isn't ways for him to still, he might not average 8 yards, 10 yards a carry, but he'll still break off the 40, 50, 60 at some point, and then it softens everything up. So much different team, and the execution will be much different. Like, all that goes out the window because the Chiefs have been on paper not the better team maybe a handful of times this year. And even the way the game is played out, I mean, Buffalo could have had them, maybe should have had them, depending on how you spot a football from here and there. And then you have the game that we had against Washington, which shout out to Washington for a great season, but you could see the difference of a team that is good maybe a year or two early to where they should be, and a team that, last year was the outlier. This is how good we really are.
Also, the Commanders, they really don't have as good of a defense as the Chiefs do. I think it's like their run defense during the regular season is 8, and the Commanders' run defense was like 28.
Yeah.
So like I I think that Saquon Barkley can have a lot of success against the Chiefs. I do think he can have a lot of success against the Chiefs, but I don't think that it's a situation where he's going to be ripping off multiple long runs, because I think the Chiefs are better at tackling, and I think that they're better at containing. I think, like you said, Washington, they had a great season, but even during that Lions game, they still couldn't stop the run, and it was really the Lions who took themselves out of the game by halting, giving it to Gibbs and giving it to Montgomery.
Yeah, it does feel like a real distant memory, that game of Philly and Washington. But all I remember in that game was just how incredible the Eagles are up front. Defense I talked about, but offense too. It just felt like Hurts had time to pat the ball and check his Facebook, and Saquon Barkley was just having wide open holes. I mean, Philly literally waved the white flag in the fourth quarter. It was such an incredible game.
And they did it with two different centers.
That's true.
Interesting.
People don't understand, like, our starting center was not even supposed to play. Like, before the game even started, the media members were like, he's probably going to be out. And he ended up playing in the second half with like a broken tailbone or something. I don't know what he has, but like it's just one of those situations where I think the Eagles this time have a better offensive line. They don't have Isaac Seumalo. I think that that Mailata is better. Juergens is younger. And I think that Becton has played really well this season, and they have more depth behind them with Steen, who could be like a decent player if need be.
Something lost in all this, in this particular playoff run, is Goddard, our tight end, is getting hot at the right time. He's actually leading the team in receiving yards in a team that has A.J. Brown and Devontae Smith. The one thing you don't have to worry about in the passing game is Barkley doesn't really – I mean, you can get like a wide open screen to him. He might be in trouble, but he's not often going to aid the passing game the way in years past, like a Darren Sproles would, or even when you had Miles Sanders. If you can say one thing about Miles Sanders, he might have slightly better hands than Barkley, but when you're a running back, that's not an overall positive. That stops you from being a negative, in my opinion. But if you broke down like position by position, on offense at least, quarterback and tight end are the only real places that Kansas City beat Philly, in my opinion. On defense, I think you can go position for position, and it might break out pretty evenly.
Probably center.
Because they have
the center in the league.
Depends on which center and how healthy they are. Yeah, I could see that as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, but the thing is, and Jalen Hurts is a wonderful quarterback, but and Nick Sirianni is a wonderful coach. But how big of a gap is Mahomes and Reed versus them two? And that's all respect to Mahomes and Reed, who are doing it at such a high level.
Strangely enough, Mahomes and Jalen Hurts have very similar statistics in the postseason. I know that Hurts has played an extra game, but I think Hurts has more touchdown passes in the postseason than Mahomes.
That seems to be all year too. It's like Mahomes, if you did a blind reveal of him versus the league average guy this year, he's pretty much that.
Yeah,
it's just been amazing.
I mean, if you put him between or next to Brock Purdy and you did a blind thing, I bet you wouldn't be able to figure out which one was which in the middle of the season.
Yeah, or even if you combined the Justin Fields and Russell Wilson stats and just called like the Pittsburgh quarterback, be pretty similar, I would say, too.
Right. But if you split it up fourth quarter between Mahomes and literally the next best guy, that's what makes him so different, where it's like, and that's where I think it comes into play, which is a huge advantage of you guys being there 2 years ago. Because Josh Allen, like the first drive of the game and the last drive of the game, he looked pretty nervous.
Yeah.
And like, shaking his hands, throwing the ball right to the defense. And I think Hurts, having been there before and having been able to go over the mistakes of the last game, I think that plays well. We won't have to kind of get used to it.
Yeah, I'm pretty comfortable saying that the moment won't be too big for anyone on offense. We do have some young guys on defense that have played, out of their mind. The exciting Whites, for example. But like, Blankenship's been there already. So, I just don't think the moment's going to be too big. You mentioned what's the gap between Sirianni and Hurts with Andy Reid and Mahomes. As far as we can tell, the difference is the last second field goal. So maybe you just got to be the team that gets that last second field goal.
Yeah. Like Hurts was a Pro Bowl player. Hurts in the postseason of the year that, you guys went in 2022, same deal. His numbers were spectacular, so, and this year he's got a lot of supporting casts. And, that's the funny thing about the narrative this year with Jalen Hurts, where it's like he's not, like, his passing yards are towards the bottom of all postseason players, but it's like every quarterback that advanced was avoiding the turnover. And it's all, I'd almost rather have him have the wherewithal to not throw the ball down the field when he knows that that can only create bad things. The Eagles have such an advantage anyways. So that's the other part about it.
I think the biggest frustrating thing, the standpoint of an Eagles fan in watching Jalen Hurts in some of these postseason games, is he had the chance to pull the trigger and not put the ball in harm's way. Like, I feel like there was like a safety against the Rams. There were a few sacks he had against the Rams where he totally could have just,
He's being too conservative.
hold it to the nearest receiver, like in the ground or in the dirt, and the Eagles probably would have gotten more points. There was a point in time against the Commanders where he took a really bad sack and it pulled them out of field goal range. Elliott missed a 55-yard field goal. So I think there's a difference between playing conservatively in those situations and not wanting to make a mistake and playing smart in the sense of not taking a sack. I think that's the major difference between Hurts and Mahomes. Mahomes is the kind of guy who probably would roll a direction and just chuck the ball out of bounds because he has the arm strength to do so.
Right.
This is something that I haven't really seen Jalen Hurts do. I think Jalen Hurts' biggest weakness, it's not his arm strength, it's not his passing ability, and this is more than just his ability to read the defense. It's the fact that in certain situations, he has enough speed to get the extra yard, but he won't. Like he'll run a certain direction and he'll pull up right before he gets to the line of scrimmage out of bounds, when we all know that you could just chuck the ball out of bounds if you wanted to, and
Right.
you wouldn't lose 2 yards. I think that, as an Eagles fan, that is the most frustrating thing about his game. It's not that he doesn't pass a lot. It's not that his ability to read the defense is not as good as other people. It's just he doesn't have that sort of quarterback, that behind the line of scrimmage awareness that, a guy like Mahomes would probably just chuck it out of bounds and be like, okay, I lost this many yards instead of losing 2.
True. And I think the biggest difference, which kind of alludes to everything you just broke down, is if we were going to win in 22, it's because Hurts had to put on a Superman cape.
Mm-hmm.
This year, not the case at all. Maybe Barkley has to put on the cape, if anyone has to put on a cape. But this team is well-rounded enough that you don't have to play with a cape on. You just have to play up to your, regular ability. I think if, again, losing my voice, sorry guys. If Barkley has an average game for Barkley standards, and that's still 87 yards, a touchdown, maybe 30 yards receiving off, like that's an average game for him. If he does that should open up the rest of the offense to play well enough to win, whether you win or not, whether there's a call that makes you rip your hair out, whether they just get the ball last. All this could not matter, and the Chiefs can win that way because we've seen it. We've seen it more times than we haven't, really. Because truthfully, the Chiefs lost one legitimate time this year, not a Carson Wentz start notwithstanding. So, and last year, it's important, it's not nothing that the Eagles were able to beat them at Arrowhead in a game that mattered as much as any regular season game is going to matter.
And by the way, the Chiefs had the ball last.
Right.
Let's not forget the fact that the Chiefs had the ball last, and there was a very questionable roughing the passer call that ended up giving the Chiefs more chances that they were not able to capitalize on. Understand, the Chiefs were probably worse last year than they were this year. And the Eagles were worse last year than they were this year in almost every category that actually matters, besides probably passing yards and passing touchdowns. So, I mean, let's not go off and say like we don't think that Patrick Mahomes is unbeatable.
Right.
But there are a lot of things that the Chiefs do, and there are a lot of ways that the Chiefs outsmart their opponents in order to win football games. It's not like we can all look at the Chiefs record this year, 15-2, and a lot of people could say, well, they got very lucky. Well, I hate to break it to people, but you need luck to win a championship. Okay. You can't win a championship with just skill alone. No one has, in my mind, no one has ever done it.
Right.
But you can look at their record and you could say, well, in this game they had a blocked field goal. In this game they had a double doink field goal. In this game they had a very particular pass interference call help them, ice the game. And in another game, there was a pass interference call that probably should have been called that wasn't called. And you could say like, oh, maybe they have
Isaiah Likely's toe was too big.
Or Likely's toe was too big. But you might
or you throw a pass that bounces off a Falcons defender's knee right into a receiver's hand and picks up a huge first down. Or a ball goes right through Julio Jones' hands.
Exactly. Or, Matthew Stafford thinking that Puka Nacua or whoever the receiver is actually the sideline. You get or a Packers return man fumbles the ball and recovers his fumble, but the refs are not able to see the upwards version of the play. So every team gets lucky, and the Chiefs are just better than other teams at
getting lucky. Yep.
So I have 2 lightning round questions for Hank before we get our closing things in, and then we were going to start with the Hall of Fame. That did not happen. We're going to end with the Hall of Fame talk here today. Trying to remember what the second question was. Oh, okay. So first question, when someone asks you, what year did the Eagles win the Super Bowl? What answer does your brain give you?
2017.
So that's the correct answer. But I swear in these conversations, they're interchangeable for most teams. Because the season is one time and the Super Bowl happens the year later. Yeah. And it gets this shirt doesn't have it, but I have shirts that say like 2018 Super Bowl on it. Because that's not a lie. That's not true. But it's a very mind-numbing thing when you talk about it as much as, it gets talked about sometimes.
Kelly thinks the opposite way. She kind of thinks the Madden way. Like Madden 2005 came out in 2004. It didn't come out in 2005. And Madden 16 came out in 2015. It did not come out in 2016. So she would say a very similar thing.
Because in a way, the Madden matches the Super Bowl of that year when you think about it.
Yeah, right. So, well,
except for 25.
Yeah. I was going to say, wait until you give her the PS3, PS4 version of Madden.
This year next year should have been Madden 25-2 is what they should have called it. But,
That's right.
Yeah.
Other question, regardless of what happens on Sunday, were we wrong about Jalen Hurts? I think we just have to say that at this point. Because he's already done more than either of us ever thought he would.
Yeah. My first gut reaction to the Philadelphia Eagles drafting Jalen Hurts was, what in the world are you doing? Like, we have Carson Wentz. He's 2 years removed from the best season that anyone's ever had as a Philadelphia Eagles quarterback in terms of passing touchdowns. He is 1 season removed from throwing for the only 4,000-yard season in Philadelphia Eagles history with guys who the Eagles picked off the streets.
Right.
I'm thinking to myself, what are you thinking? Like, what is in your head that you're thinking, like, we need to draft a quarterback in the second round? And the explanation was, well, what if Carson Wentz gets injured again and we need him? And at the time, I was a Carson Wentz stan. Anytime any Cowboys fan on the internet had anything negative about Carson Wentz to say, I was his public defender.
Mhm.
I thought, why in the world would you ever do this? You're just killing this dude's confidence. He didn't have a bad season the previous year. He didn't have the team didn't have a great season, but I didn't feel like it was just because of him.
Yeah, he dragged us
And,
kicking and screaming into the playoffs, like you said.
and I was just angry. I was just angry at Howie Roseman. I thought that, he took a team that went to the Super Bowl that he made, that I gave him credit for, that he helped construct by himself, and he just tanked it right into the toilet. And I was just incredibly mad, and I was incredibly bitter. But I think it took me throughout that whole season to think to myself, this dude is just not it. Like, Carson Wentz he's just not playing well. I think he led all quarterbacks in turnovers. We had 3
Yep.
wins with him. I think that the biggest issue that I think we both had with Jalen Hurts, and we've had many conversations about this. The Eagles social media, they're very much like Jalen Hurts defenders. There is only one quarterback that I will ever defend in my whole life, and his name is Nicholas Foles.
Yep.
That is the only guy I will ever stand here to defend to the death. There's probably someone on the internet who defends Gardner Minshew to the death. I don't know why.
Sure.
But I will say
No, he's
that
a cool guy. That's why. But go on.
yeah, he is.
Yeah.
And he lives in a van
Down by the river.
down the river.
Yeah.
I will say that he's definitely played better than I thought he was going to be. His draft stock, most people would say that he was probably anywhere between a 3rd and a 5th rounder. He's played better than I thought he was going to play. I think he's a better leader than I ever thought than Carson Wentz ever was. And he helps the team win games. But I think that the one thing that Jalen Hurts is not, that a lot of these other quarterbacks are, is for the whole season, they are guys who the team can rely on. I think that, and I'm not going to discount Jalen Hurts in any way. We've never had a quarterback do what Jalen Hurts did, go to 2 Super Bowls, not even with McNabb, not even with some of the best quarterbacks we've ever had in our team's history.
Right.
But I think that with the way that the team is structured, with good receivers, really good line, that he is able to manage things more than just be the guy. And even in 2021, where Devontae Smith was the team's best receiver, they won 9 games and he won 8 of them. But I'm just going to stand here and say that I was wrong. I was wrong about him. Even if he doesn't win the Super Bowl,
Yep.
I wouldn't have even expected him to go to the Super Bowl. I was just so mad.
Right.
But with the fact that he has to go up against the guy who is technically the GOAT right now, he has a lot on his plate that he needs to take care of to go up against that defense.
Nick, I appreciate your patience in this segment. I'll be very quick with my answer to this. The best thing about having a podcast, as long as I've had one, is that I don't have to keep my own receipts. They're just there for me. And if I go back far enough, for some people that'd be a problem. But when you think before you speak, you really don't get caught that much because you're being reasonable and you're in your thoughts and your feelings. Some people need to take notes on that. Nobody on this screen, but on other screens.
That's right.
I remember saying, I don't listen because I reacted everything Hank said. I felt as well, and then I paused and said, I need to rephrase here. I don't think the guy's a bum. I think he could be an average quarterback, above average quarterback. He might even make some Pro Bowls, but he's not the guy you're going to build a championship team around. And in a way we did, not in the sense that he's Superman, not in the sense that he's Batman. We have 2 Batmans on the outside, but he can be Nightwing at best. You didn't build the team around him, but you build a championship team with him at the center of it. He may not be who the solar system revolves around, but he's at least one of the planets. And that's more than I ever thought. So win, lose, or draw, lights go out. We got to finish the game on Monday. I was wrong about Jalen Hurts because I never expected this trip, and it's happened twice. So that much I got to say for sure.
You do this stuff long enough, you're going to be wrong about stuff. And
yeah.
It's not dead wrong. It's not saying like, I don't know.
The time I was most wrong was when we drafted Zach Ertz, and I was like, guy seems really athletic, but we have Brent Selleck. What are we doing? Fast forward a couple years, that same tight end catches the game-winning touchdown in the Super Bowl. So to quote a certain Fox host, I don't care about being right. I care about getting it right. So if they get it right, and they have gotten it right, because how often do you go to 2 Super Bowls? The only active coach, there's 3 active quarterbacks right now. Russell Wilson, who's, I don't know if he's active or not because he just got released again. Mahomes being at more, and now Hurts. Is that the only active quarterbacks that have been to multiple Super Bowls? Yeah. So that's some company right there.
Jimmy Garoppolo.
Did he go to 2? I guess he's
he
in.
Went a few times as a backup.
That's true.
Yeah.
And speaking of backups, and then I'm gonna throw it to Nick because I know we've had him sitting there way too long. The Eagles are undefeated in Super Bowls where Carson Wentz is on the bench. So we'll hope we keep that up.
Very interesting.
Yep.
2 things. One, we should also, I guess I never vocally, maybe I did, about Nick Sirianni said I'm not quite sure about him, but
yeah,
I was wrong for years about him. I'm sure, I don't know how you guys felt about him, but just his antics off the field kind of bothered me. I remember that first opening interview where I'm thinking there's no way a guy who struggles this much at a simple press conference can be an elite coach, and I was wrong about that. So that I think should be said as well. I'm
not even convinced it's the same guy that was up there that first day. Like it's not even. I don't know. You hang out with Big Dom long enough, you just but that's the second worst press conference to open a. I think the new Jacksonville coach just took the belt on that one.
Dude, and he's actually kind of a chill guy. I wonder if he's going to be the next Sirianni.
I don't know. I mean, if he takes him to a Super Bowl, all of Duval is going to be saying it that way instead. But I don't know how you screw that up. Like, I live close enough to Jacksonville that I know the proper way to say that, and that's not that at all.
Yeah, I think he's just weird. Like Sirianni, I think was just nervous. Like that was the difference.
And a lot of people say what you said. They don't love his attitude or whatever. But like, you can't really have that much different of an attitude and coach a team in Philly. Like Andy Reid was different because he was around the league enough that people kind of already knew what he was about. And he was a little more goofy and eccentric in his early years too. People forget about that. Like when they won the division for the first time in the locker room, he's like, your guys' heart's as big as my waist, and everyone's, laughing and throwing water on him. So he was a little, he's buttoned up because he's got nothing to prove anymore too. So that's part of that.
Yeah. Well, actually, on that point, real quick, me and Hank had talked about it. I'm sure Hank has talked to you about it too, about how Andy kind of a lot of big games, he really struggled. Yeah. I wonder if Nick Sirianni's personality fits better in those close games because he doesn't care that Philly media is going to crush him for last year or whatever. So, I mean, he might be the better fit.
Someone like Doug Peterson handled Philly media as good as anybody can handle it. And he's not a blue chip coach. He's just a good coach that knew the team he had and knew how to put him in position to win.
I think a lot of it had to do with the fact that Andy Reid was kind of like a Midwestern guy, going to college at like BYU and living in that area. But Nick Sirianni is literally from New York. Like he went to college in New York and he's straight up Italian. And like a quarter of all Philly fans are Italian. So at least. But I think that it's a situation where, Andy Reid also never had as much offensive talent as Nick Sirianni did. Now, you could argue that that's his fault because he never brought that talent in, and the real chance that he had to bring in talent like Steve Smith or Chad Ochocinco or one of those guys, instead he drafted Freddie Mitchell.
I mean, he did get better at that over time, drafting Deshaun Jackson, Jeremy Maclin, the tight ends, LaShawn McCoy. When everyone wanted to know Sean Marino, he did get better at it.
But by then it was too late.
For sure.
But by then it was like he was getting to the end of his time. And I think that, he was in a city where you get often criticized for anything that you do, whether you deserve it or not. And I just don't think that he could really take it anymore. And then his son died, and then he was just like, all right, I'll go to a much smaller market where I'll be appreciated more and have a really good platform of defensive players to have.
Yeah.
I don't
Did he get
think
that or what?
I don't think to this day him losing his son gets factored in enough to about how everything shook out. Not that it's something you want to bring up, but it's a very important piece of that puzzle. But yeah, he went from a guy who would have been known as like, damn, he was so close. He like this close to greatness, and now like he could have his own Hall of Fame wing at this point, regardless of what happens on Sunday. Speaking of the Hall of Fame, that's a pro segue. Only
Nice.
4 members going into the Hall this year. That's the smallest class in like 15 years or something. So we're going to run through this as I attempt to keep my voice a little bit longer. The headliner, in my opinion, is going to be the Eagle in here. But when you look at it, just as a when you look at it bluntly, the highlight here is without a doubt Chargers tight end Antonio Gates. Nick had to sit and listen to us talk for a minute. Nick, take it away. What does this mean to you as a Charger fan?
Well, first of all, he should have got in last year. I mean, there was rumors on social media like, oh, maybe I think he got suspended once for taking some sort of PED or whatever. I don't know if that's true. Even if it was, it is so silly. Most touchdowns among a tight end ever. And like, I say this to you guys now. Now, maybe it's not true, but at the time when I was watching Gates and LT and Rivers and all that stuff, I did not know how good I had it. Granted, I was young as a fan, but to this day, that was the best. I mean, I would set my alarm to watch Charger games. Now, if I miss it, that stinks, but I'm not losing sleep. I lost sleep over missing a Charger game before because we had this incredible talent. Just Antonio Gates, you had to watch him every weekend. The guy seemingly was always dealing with a turf toe or some weird nagging injury, but he always played and was just always open. He reminds me of like a young Travis Kelce, where you look at him on TV, he looks slower than the average player, but somehow he's always open. And that was Antonio Gates. Just what a special time it was watching the Chargers and watching Gates, because that guy was awesome. And he brought his own flavors being a former Kent State basketball player, because those jump balls in the end zone, man, it was not a 50-50 ball. It was 80-20, and he was coming down with it.
Hank, your thoughts?
Wasn't he undrafted too?
Yep.
Yep, completely undrafted guy who comes from out of nowhere, comes onto the scene in 2003, and doesn't he become a Pro Bowler in 2 seasons? And he's got some really good passers thrown to him, Phillip Rivers and Drew Brees, and I think that it's one of those things where the Chargers, do have quite a few Hall of Famers, and they are guys who we will all remember, straight down the line. But I feel like with Antonio Gates, he is the one who you can say literally came out of nowhere, and no one would have expected it, or he probably would have been a first or a second round draft pick. I mean, you put him and you put LT, and LT was like the second or third overall pick in the 2001 NFL draft. So I feel like if you made a Mount Rushmore of undrafted players, he would probably, of like the last 30 years, he would probably be on there.
Actually, to that point, Mount Rushmore at tight ends, to me, he's on there. It's him,
100%.
Tony G, and Travis Kelce, and then I'm forgetting the name.
I mean, you could maybe Gronk, maybe
Gronk,
Yeah.
Kelce, Tony G, and Gates to me. And then for old schoolers, maybe you can go Mackey or Newsome of the Browns. But those guys, Gates revolutionized the position. So,
yeah, in the modern NFL, everyone's looking at basketball players to be their tight end. Like I said, just broke the mold. Everybody, even now, is looking for that. And, this is more common in baseball, where some people, maybe they don't live in a baseball city, and they just watch it for the love of the sport, and they have like an American League team and a National League team. In the NFL, fans aren't like, oh, I have an NFC team and an AFC team. But growing up, if I did, it was 1,000% the Chargers because, like you said, they were must-watch television. Like, if the Eagles lost that week, I at least forgot about it for a couple minutes because the Chargers were the late game, and I get to watch Rivers and Tomlinson and Sean Merriman and Antonio Gates. So just like people, to me, they're like the greatest show on turf without the ring. They're very comparable in teams, in my opinion, and he was at the forefront of that.
Yeah, man, it just really is unfortunate. And Gates was part of that too. That the Chargers had so many failed playoff runs. I can't remember one playoff moment of Antonio Gates, but in the regular season, dude was unguardable. So congratulations to him. To me, it's a year overdue. He should have been in last year. Shout out to Sterling Sharp. He was more than a year overdue. That guy was crazy good. Eric Allen, I never saw much of him. But Jared Allen, I saw a lot of. So, the four guys, fantastic additions, and obviously my favorite Gates.
Yeah, we'll touch on the other three in a minute, but to wrap this one up, 3 first-team All-Pros, 2 second-team, 8 Pro Bowlers. Woo. He's in the All-Decade team for the 2000s. Chargers 50th anniversary in the Chargers Hall of Fame, and his number 44 is retired at Kent State. So Jared Allen is the next one on this list. This is someone that he's from the era that we pretty much saw his entire career. And I think this is a guy that gets in off of volume and longevity. And he was easily one of the best DNs of his time, which I think to get in the Hall of Fame in any sport, it's an unperfect system, right? Some guys get in for one reason, some get in for another. He is somebody that I don't think one thing you shouldn't get in for is if you were never at least like a top 3 at your position at any given time. And I think there was a speck of time there. Maybe it's only 2-3 years that he is that. And I think he gets in off his Vikings career. He played for the Panthers. He started with the Chiefs back when that wasn't a good place to be. A few other played the Bears, I think. But really, he's in because of his time in Minnesota. You could cut off the beginning and end of his career, and I think the Minnesota is why he's there. I would not have stomped my feet if he didn't get in, but I have no real qualms about Jared Allen getting in.
Yeah, no, me neither. I'm a little bugged that if you let Jared Allen in, that some other guys didn't make it this year that I'm sure we'll touch on. But yeah, we played him a couple times, and the Chargers did, and he really was a nightmare to cover. I don't think maybe he led the league in sacks a time, at most one. I don't think he led at all, to be honest. But he was a huge difference maker. I can't even think of anyone else in that D-line. It was all Jared Allen for a lot of that Minnesota career. So you had to think he was being double teamed and focused on, and he still was very productive. So totally, I don't, like you said, I'm not bothered by it.
Hank, what you got for Jared Allen?
I think you guys touched on it. I mean, face of the defensive line for like 3 or 4 years, like 2008 all the way to like 2011. He was an amazing defensive end, and didn't get to a Super Bowl, but got to I believe he got to an NFC Championship game. And I do know that a lot of Vikings fans, they if you didn't have a Adrian Peterson jersey, you probably had a Jared Allen jersey.
Yeah, that's a great way to look at that for sure. I think a distant third would be like Antonio Winfield Sr. maybe in that era, but yeah, it's definitely the one or two. Yeah. Jared Allen, 4 first-team Pro Bowls, 5 Pro Bowlers, 2-time sack leader, Nick, 07 and 11.
Wow.
He was on the all-rookie team in 04.
Disrespecting him, my bad.
Minnesota Vikings Ring of Honor. He's listed as a top 50 Viking of all time. Number 41, retired at Idaho State. Shout out to the Bengals there. This one's intriguing. He holds 2 NFL records. He has the most safeties in a career with 4 and most in a season with 2. Those are both NFL records.
One of those safeties does not count. Okay.
I don't think they're counting.
Was that Orlovsky?
Yeah, that's got to be because he was chasing him. He was
But he didn't get
chasing.
a sack. If anything, that's a quarterback rush. We'd have to
Okay.
really research that.
Hey,
You might
would
be
you
right.
be able to look at that?
Yeah, that would take a minute. Well, I will have that for the next episode. You have my
All
word.
right, cool.
Next up,
Look
we
at
got.
Hank trying to steal away I mean, yeah, it technically shouldn't count, but
I don't think that would be his, but we'll have to. That's going to take a bored day at work for me to dig into that information.
Oh yeah,
there.
love it.
Next, we have Packers wide receiver Sterling Sharp. This is a guy I saw like late in his career. Definitely didn't see him in his prime. I have Packers fans in my family, so I've seen the '95 Super Bowl enough times to like see what he. Granted, he retired right before that, actually, so he was not on that championship team. I think if he stays one more year, regardless of like how well he plays, that ring projects him in a couple of years earlier. But early favorite for Brett Favre, and when Shannon Sharp got in the Hall of Fame, he said in his speech, I'm the first guy to make the Hall of Fame and be the second best football player in my own family. That's how much, he looked at that. And in modern time, when guys get inducted, it used to be that same guy, I forget his name, from NFL Films that would surprise guys and let them know they're in. Now that he's no longer with us, they find fun, creative ways to do it. LT did it for Gates, and then they had Shannon do it for Sterling, which was really cool. If you haven't seen that video, definitely search that out. But yeah, just a really good receiver. Like I said, I think like he couldn't be denied. I don't like moving the goalpost on Hall of Fames. I think you're a Hall of Famer if you're not. It shouldn't be like if you're not a first ballot, you're less than for some reason because it's an imperfect system anyway. So over the years, his plaque isn't going to say, Hall of Famer took 5 years to get in or whatever the case. So that's not the case. But you guys, I said this one's a little hard. This is just outside of our generation of watching. But if you guys got anything on Sterling Sharp.
Yeah, I guess just like there has to be a limit. And I think for me, my comfort is he's right at that limit. Like you got to play at least 7 years, 7 years in the league. Like even if you're the best at your position, because how valuable is someone who's amazing for a couple of years? Like there's a limit there. I think he's right at the limit. So I would have been fine him going in a long time ago. But certainly no one is mad that he's not in. He totally deserves it.
I think there's one player in NFL history who was in the league for 5 years and he got into the Hall of Fame, that Jaguars offensive lineman.
Tony Baselli?
Yeah, I think he's the only one who's been he was in the league for 5 years. I think he got
that's it.
He got
Two things for you to look at, Phil, during your board.
So I will give you a little bit on Baselli real quick. He was the first signed player to the Jaguars. He has that fame when they were an expansion team. 95. And then in 2002, he was the first ever Houston Texan as well. Mm-hmm. So he does have that. And he has now been added to the Jaguars front office too. So that's what he's doing these days.
Wow.
Yeah. And O-line is so hard, right? You don't have stats to go off of. You do have all pros and Pro Bowls, but that's a really different. It's a really hard one to argue too. Like I can't imagine someone getting on their milk crate about an O-lineman because like if they played long enough, which in this case he didn't, but in general, like if you start for a decade and a half, you're probably good at it. Like they're not going to keep you in if you're not. But back to Sterling Sharp real quick. 3 All-Pros, 5-time Pro Bowler, 3-time receptions leader, 89, 92, and 93, receiving yards leader in 92, 2-time receiving touchdown leader, 92, 94, Packers Hall of Fame. His number 2 jersey is retired at South Carolina. This now leads to the main event for us. Again, I feel Gates is probably the headliner in this class. Eric Allen, Eagles cornerback of, yesteryear, definitely before my time, but you don't become an Eagles fan without hearing about the greatness of Eric Allen. I always thought, I'm around Eagles fans. They're going to tell me how great he was. I didn't realize it was appreciated by the league as a whole. And maybe it took a little longer than I would have thought, but it was really cool to like, we love Brian Dawkins in Philly. The fact I didn't think the rest of the league was going to look at him as like the first ballot, second ballot Hall of Famer that he is. So that was really nice to see, back in 2017. It's kind of like that with this. Eric Allen is like, he's in the early 90s as the team was good before Cunningham got hurt or whatever. He was a big part of that defense in 92. That was the first defense, I think, to be number 1 overall in pass and rush in the same year. He had a lot to do with that secondary. There was other great guys on that secondary. I don't know that any of them will get in the Hall of Fame. So he kind of represents that era of Eagles defense. There's guys on the line, Reggie White, Jerome Brown. Well, Jerome Brown didn't play long enough, but Reggie White, Seth Joyner, potentially, down the line or whatever. So he really represents the secondary of those legendary early 90s Eagles defense. Hank, what about you? I think you might have a little more memory of Eric Allen than me.
Honestly, I probably don't. I think we probably started watching at around the same time, like in the mid 90s. I honestly I just have old film of viewing of Eric Allen. I think that the highlight of Eric Allen's career was the interception return for a touchdown against the New York Jets in the 90s season, where he ran probably 2 times more than the touchdown in yardage on the field that he actually ended up returning it for. Like, he was like running up the field, down, like up the sideline, down the sideline, and it was kind of like a video game, if I can really explain it the best way. And I think he had like 4 interceptions in one game or something, like something super ridiculous like that. Like, he had like the most interceptions in a game in Eagles history. And I remember thinking, like, he's definitely not a big name. Like, if you ask the Chiefs fan who's Eric Allen, they'd probably be like, I don't know, some guy, some guy down the street making me a sandwich. I don't know. But he's just one of those guys who it is probably the closest thing to Deion Sanders that the Eagles had at cornerback. Like, not like a super big guy, but like a fast guy who knew how to catch the ball. Like, I'm not saying that Eric Allen is Deion Sanders or Prime Time or Coach Prime, but he was a fast guy who could catch the ball and score and intercept the ball and score touchdowns.
Yeah, I would call him the blueprint for guys like a Darrelle Revis and a Asante Samuel that came a decade later. I think he was kind of like that's the kind of guy that those players grew up to be, were watching at the time. And Nick, here's a little connection for you. From San Diego, went to Arizona State, and is in the where'd he go? The San Diego Hall of Champions, which is apparently a sports museum in San Diego somewhere.
That's for every sports, high school, college, pro. Yeah, they have it.
It's at Petco Park. It's connected to where the Padres play.
Yeah, that's so cool. I've only seen one. Now I really like the guy, but Eric Allen, I've only seen one clip, and it was that return against the Jets. And I figure any other clip I'm going to watch is not going to be anywhere near as amazing as that. I mean, that is the most amazing pick six I've ever seen.
It was labeled as where'd it go? Sorry. It was labeled as the greatest interception return for a touchdown in history by NFL Films at the time. He played for the Saints and Raiders late in his career, but this is clearly due to his Eagles stint from 88 to 94. 1-time first-team All-Pro, 2-time second-team All-Pros, 6-time Pro Bowlers, was on the All-Rookie team, Eagles Hall of Fame, Eagles 75th anniversary team. Maybe the shortest resume of anyone that got in this year, but I don't know if it I don't want to call it like nepotism, but he has worked closely in the NFL. He's on the NFL PA board. I think he was the chairman during the last CBA thing. I don't know if he's still on that level, but maybe working close with the league. When they do his Hall of Fame thing, will they mention that? Because some guys get in like baseball, they were a pretty dang good player, and then they're an accomplished coach, and that's kind of all mushed together, kind of like in like basketball Hall of Fame too. So I think just like an overall positive to the game of football is why someone like Eric Allen gets in. I think that's a good place to leave that.
Yeah, for sure. I think what we noticed this year was the class, other than Gates, to be honest, every other player has a imperfect resume. And I think Eric Allen was one, and, guys that didn't get in, Vinatieri, Kuechly, and Eli Manning. I mean, they all have imperfect resumes, and the guys that got in do too. And I think the voters figured, yeah, you're going to be in the logjam next year because your resume's it's really good, but we don't love it enough to say you got to be in.
I think it's commendable to only put in 4 while it's weird to look at such a small class. It's better than, oh, we're going to throw some people in so the class is bigger. I think that would have been a disservice as well.
Aren't they going to add in coaches and like other guys?
I hope so. I heard there was
so.
a guy. I mean, I
And,
think
like,
Shanahan's not in yet. I think there's guys that's like they got to be in.
I mean,
So,
they're
yeah, I
going
don't-
in tomorrow, so they would have announced it by now. It's time of recording. They're going to go in on Saturday, so they would have announced it by now, I would think.
Great.
'Cause
Their
usually-
criteria for
Usually they induct like 7 people.
Right, exactly. Yeah. There's
Right,
usually
but I heard-
7. It's been up to 9 in the past.
Yeah, I heard you got to hit a requirement too, like a certain voting requirement.
80% approval or something like they said.
Yeah.
Okay.
But yeah, to the coaches are totally logjam. I don't even know the list, but I know the list is crazy.
They should
With
do a
players,
coaches
that's
one
crazy.
at like mid-season to get the coaches done because you don't have to get players out to. I don't know. They could do a whole separate one for the coaches, in my opinion, if they're really that log jammed. But I think that'd be a good idea. But guys, this has been pretty therapeutic for me. I am slightly less anxious now for what will happen in 24
Sorry,
hours.
Giants fans, no therapy for you tonight. Okay,
No.
You can argue all year about Eli.
And we would talk about the Luka trade, but we are out of time. So maybe next time we can get into that. But I am very hoping the next time I see these faces on my screen or the next time this face is on anybody's screen, we have broken into our inner excellence. And I'm the fan of a team that has 2 Super Bowl championships. But that's why we play the game. We will find out. No matter what happens, there will be tears and there will be beers. So give them hell. Fly, Eagles, fly. Thank you guys for listening. And we'll see what happens next time. Thanks, guys.
Cooper, they didn't bring us here to change the past.
Say that again.
They didn't bring us here to change the past.